do it because
Okay, there we go. All right, so you ready to go?
indeed.
Okay, well, welcome. We're here with our good client, Cara. We're starting off a bit of a series where Paul and I are going to share some testimonials of our clients that have signed up for what we call our annual reviews. These are, macro strategic portfolio reviews that we find are very important because as you grow your investment business, quite often we find it's challenging for our clients, including ourselves, to take that acquisition hat off and replace it with the asset manager hat. And the really important part of that is understanding where your capital sits. Is your capital being used efficiently and ideally in a manner that's going to allow you to grow and move forward and ultimately achieve your investment goals and your lifestyle goals, right? So Cara was one of our great clients that's been nice enough to come on here to discuss a bit about her story. She signed up for our annual reviews. So we sat down, maybe a couple years ago, looked at your
Yeah.
portfolio, identified some areas where, hey, maybe looking at divesting an asset and taking a few steps backwards will actually propel you forward. So, Carol, I'll turn it over to you if you don't mind just telling a bit about your story, your challenges, and kind of where you were and where we've got you to today.
How much time do you have?
Yeah, it was quite the
So,
story,
yes.
that's for sure.
Well, I owned a rental property, and on paper, it looked like it should have been a really good kind of long-term hold. But after being able to really review my portfolio with you, I realized that the reality of this was completely different. The property was costing me a lot of money and tying up a capital that could have been used much more effectively elsewhere. So thanks to you, of course, you kind of helped me step back and look at that bigger picture, not so emotionally, but more strategically. We walk through the numbers, we talk through all of that, the risks, any sort of long-term goals that I might have. So in the end, it turned out that selling wasn't a failure at all in my portfolio. It was definitely the right decision. I was able to repurpose that capital to pay down debt and even put myself in a position to buy a home in Toronto rather than having to rent. So,
Awesome. Yeah.
that
And
experience really reinforced how important it is to actually review your portfolio and be willing to make those changes when something no longer serves you.
I
So
think that's a
definitely,
great point, not to interject there, but quite often, like I said earlier, we kind of get in this acquisition mode as investors. And, we hang on really tight and don't want to divest some of the assets that aren't performing well. And I often say to my clients, quite simply, if you and I were sitting across from a table and I owned a corner store as a business and I was like, hey, Cara or another client, I think you should buy this business. The first thing you probably ask me is, okay, how much? But also, at the end of the day, what is the business going to do for me? Meaning, is it profitable, right? If I'm going to put a ton of my energy into the business, and that's what businesses take, it has to provide me something in return, right? And I think as
yeah,
investors, especially real estate investors, we often forget about that, right? And the key is if I'm injecting a ton amount of energy into my business, which is my investment portfolio, and it's giving me a negative return, but ultimately I have options to repurpose that capital that are going to propel me forward and give me something in return. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And ultimately that's what you did, Cara, right? So maybe tell a little bit about the story also of, okay, we've paid off some bad debt, which is great. So overall, your
mm-hmm.
lifestyle is improved, but now we've got you also out of renting in the city of
Yep,
Toronto and buying in the city of Toronto. So it also
yeah,
reduces your monthly costs.
very much so. Yeah, I'm not paying for a mortgage that's not, giving back essentially. I had renters in there and it was more hemorrhaging than it was anything else. So now been able to stabilize now that that debt repayment is done and purchase instead of continuing to rent. So I still have something of my own and can continue to reinvest as I move forward,
Yeah, and
increase those numbers.
it's a great point because paying off some of that bad debt and, propelling your portfolio forward positively also reflects well with the bank, because now when you guys go to make your next move, ideally probably into a multifamily asset that's going to produce more cash flow, the bank will look at that and say, hey, you've paid off a lot of bad debt. Well, guess what? Now your
Yeah.
purchasing power goes up and it frees up more liquidity for us to now drive forward and ultimately achieve some of those goals, right? So quite often with investors we work with and through these strategic portfolio reviews, we identify some of these assets that aren't doing well, and it's simply about repurposing the capital and getting you on a path to ultimately achieve your goals. So if you're trying to achieve $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a month in positive cash flow, and you have an asset that's negative cash flow or it's just neutral, sometimes the best thing to do is unload it and start again and move forward, right? It's done its job. So, kudos to you and Nick. I think you guys have done a fantastic job. And, I appreciate you jumping on here and just share a little bit about your story. And hopefully we have, some other clients that are going to step forward and do the same thing, because quite honestly, we do a lot of these strategic portfolio reviews, whether it be annually, quarterly, or monthly. But out of hundreds of investors we work with, we're still talking about only a few dozen people that do this every year, and it's so valuable. So appreciate you jumping on.
Thank you.